Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, it's never enough? It's like you're running toward a finish line that keeps moving. Faster, further, always just out of reach. You hold yourself to impossible standards. You expect excellence, not just from others, but from yourself, every hour, every day. And when you fall short, it feels less like a mistake and more like failure as a person. But where did that voice come from? The one that whispers you should be better? The one that shames you when you're tired? Is it your parents, your teachers? Or could it be something more subtle, more intimate? The stories you grew up with. Anime has a peculiar way of shaping identity. It's more than just entertainment. It often becomes an emotional blueprint, especially for a generation raised on shonen heroes, tragic backstories, and characters who carry entire worlds on their shoulders. Characters like Tanjiro, Levi, Light, and Deku don't just fight battles, they fight themselves. Their guilt, their past, their need to be good, always good, even when it's killing them. In this video, I'm going to explore how anime, particularly the moral intensity of its heroes, has fostered a kind of perfectionism in viewers. Not just any perfectionism, but one rooted in trauma, validation, and the unconscious fear of not being enough. With help from Carl Jung, Freud, and the mythic echoes buried in the genre, we'll try to understand how stories about noble suffering can become scripts for our own. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find a way to let go. It's a lie of effortless virtue. Okay, from the very first frame, anime doesn't just tell you who the hero is, it tells you who you should be. We meet them alone, often broken, staring at a grave, falling from a rooftop, waking up in a world that doesn't love them yet. But what makes them heroic isn't just power, it's how they strive. Even the weakest characters have unshakable conviction. They protect others, they never give up, and they do it all without complaint. Or worse, when they do complain, they're punished by the story until they learn to suppress that voice. This is where the perfectionist seed is planted, For many of us, anime was there in the absence of something else. A stable parent, a friend who understood, a teacher who believed in us. These characters became ideals, mirrors, even moral parents. We didn't just admire them, we tried to become them. But here's the paradox. Almost every anime hero is traumatized, orphaned, betrayed, burdened with the fate of others. And yet, they respond not with bitterness, but with compassion. Not with rage, but with righteous resolve. Naruto becomes Hokage, not out of revenge, but out of love for a village that scorned him. Tanjiro chooses mercy for demons who've slaughtered his family. Deku breaks his bones to protect a class that constantly underestimates him. Even Light Yagami, twisted as he becomes, begins with a desire to create a better world. The message is clear. Goodness is something you must earn through pain, through sacrifice, through performance. And what we internalize without realizing it is this: to be lovable, to be worthy, we must never stop striving. Rest is guilt. Weakness is failure. Vulnerability is a detour, not a destination. Carl Jung warned of this. He called it the tyranny of the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted by society. In anime, this mask often looks noble, but it's a mask nonetheless. It hides the shadow, the repressed parts of the self we refuse to acknowledge, the exhaustion, the resentment, the quiet scream of "I don't want to do this anymore." But anime rarely gives us permission to hear that scream. When a hero finally breaks down, they're either villainized or they disappear. Think of Guts when he walks away. Think of Itachi. Think of Lelouch. Even in vulnerability, perfection is demanded. Freud once said that the superego, the internalized voice of authority, doesn't reward you for being good. It punishes you for not being good enough. Anime, for all its depth and beauty, sometimes becomes that voice. And if we're not careful, we begin scripting our lives around a fantasy of flawless goodness. Not because it makes us happy, but because we're terrified of what happens if we ever stop. But what if the very thing we admire is also what's eating us alive? When praise feels like pressure, there's something strange that happens when a child hears the words, "You're so smart, you're so talented, you're going to do great things." Praise, at first, feels like sunlight, warm, encouraging, alive. But over time, it can become something else entirely. A mirror to clean, a spotlight too bright, a mountain too high to keep climbing. And in that light, many begin to wonder, what happens if I fail? What happens if I'm not perfect? What if I was never enough in the first place? In anime, the motif of giftedness often appears as both a blessing and a curse. Take Shogu Hinata from Haikyuu's natural athleticism and boundless optimism still can't erase the reality of being underestimated due to his height. Or Killua Zoldyck from Hunter x Hunter, a prodigy raised in a family of assassins, praised for his skill but shackled by the pressure of legacy. These characters don't just face their rivals, they face expectations so high they become prisons. And many of us have lived that same script. In real life, those who are praised from a young age often internalize the idea that being good, being liked, being gifted, being productive is the only way to earn love. The child who was complimented for being quiet becomes an adult, afraid to speak up. The one praised for their intelligence becomes terrified of being wrong. Slowly, subtly, performance becomes identity, and failure becomes existential. It's what psychologist Carol Dweck described in her research on mindset. Children praised for their effort tend to develop a growth mindset, the belief that skills can be developed. But those praised for their ability tend to develop a fixed mindset, the belief that success depends on being naturally gifted. The result? A lifelong fear of failing, because failure isn't seen as part of growth. It's seen as proof that you're not who they thought you were. And in anime, this psychological wound is often animated in full color. In My Hero Academia, we meet Todoroki Shoto, the product of a quirk marriage designed to create the perfect hero. His father, Endeavor, doesn't praise Shoto. He builds him like a project, like a symbol, not a son. And even though Todoroki is one of the most powerful students in UA, he isn't free. He's performing under the weight of someone else's expectations. Someone who believed that greatness was owed, not earned. This is where perfectionism hides. Not in excellence, but in obligation. It wears the mask of diligence, but behind it is fear. Fear of disappointing. Fear of no longer being worthy. Fear that love will vanish the moment you fall short. Perfectionism, at its core, is not about high standards. It's about survival. If I make a mistake, they'll leave. If I fail this test, I'm nothing. If I don't win, I don't exist. And so, we try to outrun the fear by doing more, by achieving more. The line always moves. Just like Light Yagami in Death Note, we begin by trying to fix something. Injustice, expectations, our sense of powerlessness, and then lose ourselves to the performance. Light didn't start out a god. He started out as a student. It's a brilliant one, a praised one, a good one. And all it took was the wrong kind of power, placed in the wrong kind of pressure, to twist that goodness into something cold, something righteous, something dangerous. We see it again in Sasuke Uchiha, whose perfectionism comes not from praise, but from trauma. After losing his entire clan, Sasuke dedicates his life to becoming stronger, not for himself, but to avenge the dead. His mission consumes him. His worth becomes tethered to power. And in that tunnel vision, he sacrifices friendship, safety, peace, all to keep climbing a ladder whose top keeps vanishing. Because here's the truth. When your identity depends on being perfect, you can never truly rest. When your self-worth depends on being good, goodness becomes a performance. And when the world only seems to value you for what you do, not who you are, you begin to fear that beneath the performance, there's nothing worth loving, And that's what makes anime such a uniquely cathartic lens. Exaggerates reality just enough to expose the wound beneath it. It says, here, look at yourself. Don't look away. And sometimes we don't even realize we're looking in a mirror. A mirror like Shinji Ikari in Neon Genesis Evangelion, who can't distinguish between obligation and identity. Who gets inside the Eva, not because he wants to be a hero, but because he's desperate for approval. And every time he fails, the guilt consumes him like a wave. Every time he succeeds, it still doesn't feel like enough, because no matter what, Shinji doesn't believe he deserves love. He believes he has to earn it. And so do we. And that is why praise, when given without nuance, becomes pressure. That's why talent, without space to fail, becomes a burden. And that's why so many of us, raised to be good, quietly self-destruct the moment we feel like we're not. We don't burn out because we're weak. We burn out because we're carrying the weight of being good, being liked, being useful all the time. And anime, in all its emotion and hyperbole, gives us a language for this quiet despair. It tells us what we didn't know how to say, and slowly it gives us the courage to rewrite the story. Because perfectionism isn't a personality trait, it's a survival strategy. But it doesn't have to be the rest of your life. It's a quiet tyranny of self-improvement. It's a quiet tyranny in our lives, one that never screams, never punishes, never lashes out. Instead, it whispers, be better, do more, push harder. You don't know exactly when it began, but somewhere along the line, rest became laziness, enjoyment became a distraction, and anything less than relentless forward motion became failure. We live in a culture obsessed with becoming smarter, stronger, more productive, more resilient, more like the person we're supposed to be. Okay? The language of motivation surrounds us. Don't settle. Crush your goals. Be better than yesterday. And it sounds noble, even healthy, but underneath, something darker festers. A subtle guilt that you are not, and may never be, enough. Anime knows this feeling intimately. It glorifies it, even the long nights, the bruised knuckles, the trembling hands of someone who should have stopped hours ago. Characters grind their bodies to the edge of collapse. They fight through blood and bone and failure, chasing the illusion of worth, and we call it heroism. But look closer, and it begins to feel less like courage, okay, and more like compulsion. Gone, the price of proving you're worthy. Gone Freaks from Hunter x Hunter starts out as the image of cheerful perseverance. He wants to find his father. He wants to get stronger. He wants to be kind. But as the series darkens, so does he. His optimism curdles into obsession. He stops sleeping, stops smiling, and, in his most devastating moment, he trades years of his own life for a single act of vengeance. Because somewhere deep inside, he believes he has to. He doesn't want to survive. He wants to prove something, that he was strong enough, that he was good enough, that the pain meant something. And that's the trap. The moment your sense of self becomes tied to constant striving, you stop being a person and start being a project. You start believing you only matter when you're improving, that every idle moment is a moral failure, that who you are now is unworthy of love. And this doesn't just stay on the screen, it bleeds into us. We binge shows about superhuman discipline. We quote characters who talk about surpassing limits. We idolize protagonists who sacrifice everything to chase their goals, and then wonder why we burn out trying to do the same. We turn productivity into identity, progress into morality. And when we stumble, it's not just disappointment we feel, it's shame. Brown calls shame the voice that says, I am not enough. Not, I made a mistake, but I am the mistake. It's the feeling that drives perfectionism, that nagging, invisible pressure to constantly earn your place in the world. Shoyo Hinata, the never-ending jump. Take Shoyo Hinata from Haikyuu. It's a joyful character, driven, hopeful, endlessly energetic. But behind that is a desperation to measure up. He's short, underestimated, left behind, and he builds his entire self-worth on leaping past his limits. He trains endlessly, competes obsessively. And while the show celebrates this growth, there's an underlying message. If you're not progressing, you're not valuable. Even his setbacks become motivation. Even exhaustion is a badge of honor. And the scariest part is that we relate to it. We cheer him on while doing the same to ourselves. We internalize this cycle, that our suffering is proof of our sincerity. That pain equals purpose, that our struggle means we deserve a place in the world. But what happens when we stop improving? When we hit a wall? When our minds are tired and our bodies say no? We feel guilt, And not just any guilt, but existential guilt. It's a deep, aching feeling that we're failing as people, that we've wasted time. Others are passing us by, that we should be further, better, more. This is the same guilt that makes you open your phone to check work emails at midnight. It's guilt that makes you go to the gym even when your knees hurt. It's the guilt that whispers that rest is weakness, that boundaries are selfish, that you haven't earned a break. It's not a coach yelling at you. It's your own voice asking why you're still not enough. Eren Yeager, the identity of the grinder. Then there's Attack on Titans. Eren, the early version, is a symbol of fury and resolve. He trains relentlessly, throws himself into danger, and screams that he'll destroy every obstacle in his path. And we admire that at first, but it becomes clear that he doesn't just want victory. He needs it. He needs it to justify his existence. He needs it to quiet the shame. And when he fails, when his power isn't enough, he doesn't grieve. He breaks. Because for Eren, strength isn't a goal. It's a survival strategy. Without it, he doesn't know who he is. And isn't that what we do too? We tell ourselves, I'll rest when I've earned it. I'll love myself when I succeed. I'll stop grinding when I'm finally proud of who I am. But that day never comes, because perfectionism isn't a destination. It's a moving target. No matter how far you get, there's always something else to fix, to learn, to improve. And if you're not careful, self-improvement becomes self-erasure, a constant war against your present self in the name of some future ideal. The guilt of not being enough. This is the cycle of guilt. You wake up already behind. You try to rest, but you feel uneasy. You look around, and everyone seems to be doing more. Faster, better, cleaner. You tell yourself you'll push through, you'll be better, you'll catch up, and you do for a while. But eventually the exhaustion hits, and when it does, you feel guilty for slowing down. And so the cycle begins again. Guilt gives grind, gives burnout, gives guilt again. And maybe the hardest part is that people praise you for it. They admire your work ethic. They applaud your dedication, call you inspiring. And so you keep pushing, because praise is addictive, because rest feels like failure, because slowing down feels like disappearing. But here's the truth. Your value isn't measured by your usefulness, not by your output, not by your grind, not by how many things you check off a list every day. And until you believe that, the guilt never goes away. Letting go of the hustle identity. Let this sink in. You're allowed to exist without earning it, You're allowed to take up space without improving something, You are allowed to rest, even if you haven't reached all your goals. Not everything has to be a transformation. Not every moment has to be optimized. You are not a project. You are a person. And people need more than progress. They need peace. The perfectionism you carry is not your fault. It was taught to you by culture, by school, by broken systems that turn self-worth into currency. But you can unlearn it, slowly, kindly, by forgiving your unfinished self, by seeing rest not as a break from growth, but as growth itself. You are not behind. You are alive. And that is enough. before the quiet is gone. Sometimes we only stop running when our legs give out. We lie on the floor, not out of peace, but collapse. The world told you to try harder, so you did. It told you to smile more, so you did. It told you to fix everything, even what was never yours to carry. And you believed that if you just stayed good enough, maybe it would all stop hurting. But here you are, breaths shallow, hands tired, afraid of what stillness might say about you. No one taught you that silence could be a sanctuary, that nothingness could be enough, right? That the most courageous thing you could ever do is rest before the breakdown, not after. Okay. So now, let's talk about the guilt of rest, the ache of stillness, okay, and why healing in anime and in life is so often cut short. The mirror breaks when being good becomes a cage. There's a strange kind of suffering that comes from trying too hard to be good. Not righteous, not kind, not compassionate, but good in the way others expect you to be. It begins as a whisper, the internal echo of praise, or sometimes punishment. A parent's disappointment, a teacher's approval, a friend's sudden silence when you broke from the script. And before you realize it, good stops being a compass and becomes a chain. Freud called this the superego, the part of the psyche that internalizes the rules of authority, of morality, of society. The superego doesn't ask who you really are. It only wants to know, have you earned your place? Are you worthy of being loved? Gone, the price of love, it says, is perfection. Let's look at Midoriya from My Hero Academia. From the outside, he's the image of determination, always pushing past his limits, breaking his body for others. But look more closely, and you'll see something quieter, more tragic. Midoriya doesn't fight because he wants to. He fights because he believes he has to. Because if he doesn't, he's worthless, powerless, a fraud. Even when he gets one for all, a literal symbol of hope, he still doesn't feel enough. So he hurts himself to prove that he deserves it. This isn't heroism, it's martyrdom, the kind born from a superego, so loud it drowns out his own voice. It's the voice that tells you you haven't done enough. They'll leave if you rest. You're only lovable if you're useful. And so you push and break till eventually you're gone. Now, think about Tanjiro from Demon Slayer. He's kind, compassionate, always willing to see the humanity in others, even demons, but sometimes too kind, too forgiving. There are moments when he almost dies because he refuses to hate his enemy. Even when he's bleeding, grieving, exhausted, he takes on the pain of the world as if he's responsible for fixing it. But is he really that good? Or has his idea of goodness been shaped by grief and guilt? His family is slaughtered, and so he decides, I must make it right, even when it's not his fault. This is the superego in disguise. It wears the mask of empathy, but underneath, it whispers, you weren't strong enough, so now you must suffer to make up for it. That's the danger of the superego. It doesn't just shame your mistakes, it shames your boundaries. It punishes you for saying no, for taking space, for being angry. Because to be good in the eyes of the superego is to erase yourself. And then there's Thorfinn from Vinland Saga, perhaps the most brutal transformation of all. A child raised by war, a boy who loses everything. He becomes a weapon, but not by choice. He is forged by rage. But later, after Askeladd dies, after the revenge he lived for disappears, Thorfinn becomes silent, not peaceful, just quiet. He's punished himself for so long that he begins to think, I have no right to feel anything. So he numbs it, smiles, submits. Peace, yes, but peace built on repression. He becomes a pacifist, not from freedom, but from self-loathing. A life built not on who he is, but on who he thinks he's not allowed to be. That's the final evolution of the superego, when it doesn't just tell you what's wrong, it tells you that you are wrong. Your anger, your needs, your pain, These aren't just character arcs, they're reflections of us. Think about your own life. Have you ever apologized for something you didn't do just to keep the peace? Have you ever smiled when you wanted to scream? Have you said yes because you were afraid to say no? That's the superego at work. It's not the voice of conscience. It's the voice of conditioning, of shame, of fear dressed up as virtue. It turns kindness into obligation, it's compassion into compulsion, and love into performance. But here's the thing, the superego never tells you. You cannot earn your way into wholeness. You can't bleed enough to become good. You can't break yourself into worth, because you were never broken to begin with. Carl Jung said that the path to individuation, the path to becoming whole, doesn't come from suppressing the shadow, but integrating it. That means facing the parts of yourself that the superego rejects. Your anger, your selfishness, your desire to say no, your right to rest. Jung wrote, "I'd rather be whole than good." And maybe that's the choice we all face. To keep chasing the ever-moving target of being good in everyone's eyes, or to finally ask, what does it mean to be real in my own? You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. You don't have to be kind when you're crumbling. You don't have to save everyone. Sometimes, being good is just a survival strategy, a way to stay loved, a way to stay safe. But if it costs you your authenticity, your peace, your soul, is it still good? Maybe it's time to rewrite what goodness means. Not as obedience, not as perfection, but as wholeness. To stop performing and start becoming. 'Cause when the mirror breaks, you're finally free to stop staring at who they told you to be and start seeing who you've been all along. There's a kind of person the world silently worships. They are calm when others panic, compassionate when others condemn. They carry the burdens no one else can hold, and they do it with a smile. You know them, you might be them. They are the strong friend, the golden child, the emotional caretaker, and they are slowly falling apart. To be the good one seems like a blessing, but over time, it becomes a curse. Because once you've become the dependable one, the one who always understands, who never complains, who always makes room for others, no one stops to ask if you're okay. You've made it look too easy to suffer in silence. And the worst part, you start to believe that silence is strength, that your value is measured by how much you can endure without breaking. Doria smiles through cracked ribs. Tanjiro carries his grief like a prayer. Thorfinn stares blankly at a world he no longer feels part of. They're not broken because they were weak. They're broken because they were too good for too long. And no one told them. You don't have to burn yourself just to keep others warm. In psychology, this is called emotional labor, the invisible work of keeping everyone else okay, suppressing your own needs to keep the peace, apologizing before you even know what you've done wrong, being the translator, the healer, the forgiver. But emotional labor has a cost. You lose touch with your own needs. You start feeling guilty just for taking up space. You begin to confuse self-abandonment with love. Jung warned us about this. When you live too long as your persona, the mask you wear to survive, the shadow begins to grow. And the more you pretend to be okay, the louder the shadow becomes. It whispers at night. You're tired. You're angry. Nate, you're not okay. But you've built your entire identity on being good, so you push it down. You smile harder. You say, I'm fine. And that's when the fractures begin. Midoriya doesn't cry because he's weak. He cries because he's been strong for too long. Because no one told him that even heroes are allowed to need help. Tanjiro isn't guilty because he did something wrong. He's guilty because he's human, and humans can't save everyone. And Thorfinn isn't alone because he's unworthy. He's alone because he's forgotten how to ask for anything. This isn't just fiction, it's our reflection. How many of us were taught that love must be earned? That kindness is only real if it comes without complaint. That our worth is in our usefulness, not our being. So we become caretakers. We soothe others even when we're hurting. We say yes while screaming no inside. We give everything and then wonder why we feel empty, because no one told us. You're allowed to have needs. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to rest. Being good doesn't mean being perfect. Being good doesn't mean being silent. Being good doesn't mean being small. True goodness isn't self-erasure. It's self-integration. Jung called this the path of individuation, a return to wholeness. Key, it means embracing not just your light, but your shadow. The part of you that says, I matter too. I deserve peace. I am not a machine built to serve. And when you finally stop performing, when you finally let the mask slip, you don't become less lovable. You become real. You stop being the idea of a perfect friend, perfect child, perfect savior, and start being human, imperfect, messy, whole. Let's return to our heroes. Midoriya learns to lean on others. He doesn't stop being brave, but his bravery becomes shared. Tanjiro begins to forgive himself. He still mourns, but no longer as penance. And Thorfinn, he starts to rebuild, not by erasing his past, but by owning it, living with the pain, not under it. The world will always praise your goodness, but only you can protect your wholeness. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your suffering. You don't have to bleed to be loved. You are not the sum of how much you give. You are not the absence of mistakes. Key, you are not a character in someone else's story. You are allowed to be flawed. Key, you are allowed to take up space. Key, you are allowed to exist for yourself. There is power in your no. Hey, there is courage in your boundaries. There is beauty in your scars. Because the moment you stop trying to be good for everyone else, it's the moment you begin to be good to yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of goodness the world needs most. You are not a character in a story. You are not a redemption arc. You are not here to prove anything to anyone. There is no narrator watching you, waiting for your breakthrough. It's no audience rooting for your pain to finally make sense. No cosmic scorekeeper tallying your worth. There's just you, breathing, beating, becoming, and maybe that's enough. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that being good means being hard on yourself, that love has to be earned, that healing has to be deserved. So you took on the weight. You became careful, helpful, quiet. You molded yourself into the version of you the world would praise, even if it meant abandoning the version of you that hurt, the one that cried too much, got angry too easily, needed too often. But none of that was weakness. It was you, unfiltered. And maybe the point was never to overcome your flaws. Maybe it was to include them. You're allowed to rest, even when there's work to do. You're allowed to be soft, even when the world is not. You're allowed to stop performing, even if the silence makes others uncomfortable. Because being whole isn't about reaching some final, polished version of yourself. It's about remembering the pieces you were taught to hide and choosing to carry them anyway. So before you go back out there into a world that rewards productivity over presence, perfection over authenticity, sacrifice over self-respect, ask yourself, who are you trying to become? And does that version of you allow you to breathe, to feel, to fail? Does it leave room for your softness, your limits, your humanity? If not, maybe it's time to rewrite the story, because you don't need to be a hero. You don't need to be the strongest or the kindest or the most put together version of yourself. You just need to be someone you can live with, someone who lets you be real, even when it's messy. Hey, even when it's not enough for everyone else. Maybe the most radical thing you can do is to stop trying so hard to be good and just start being real.